Progressive. Progressive Commercial Auto Insurance protects the vehicles that work to keep small businesses moving forward, including protection while running errands and other tasks. At progressivecommercial.com.
Thursday, April 17th. This is Studio 2. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman-Arendt. What we know about immigration enforcement in our region right now, Cherry, is largely driven by a slow drip of headlines. Mm-hmm. A visa revocation here, a workplace raid there. What we don't really have is a complete picture. And while we cannot give you a complete picture today, what we're trying to do on today's show is talk to experts who are closer to what's happening on the ground so they can explain to us what indeed is happening in immigration enforcement right now in our region and how that compares to the past. So that's going to be the main topic today. And our questions for you are these. What do you want to know about immigration enforcement in our region? Have you or someone you know been impacted by new policies or approaches? Call 888-477-9499, email studio2@whyy.org, or if you're on YouTube, drop a comment right there in the chat.
Yeah, I hope we really hear from folks. We want to hear your questions because we've done the policy debate show. This is not that.
Yes.
This is really about impact and being closer to the ground. So we'd love to hear from you. And before we do that, though, we have a trio of local news stories.
Start us off, Cherry.
Yeah, there is new information on the arson attack against Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. If you recalled, the accused 38-year-old Cody Balmer was charged with attempted homicide, terrorism, arson, and related crimes after allegedly setting the governor's mansion on fire as his family, the governor and his family, slept inside. According to a search warrant that was executed this week, Balmer called 911. Shortly after the incident, he identified himself by name. He said he was willing to confess and expressed hatred for Shapiro. He called him a monster. That's what he did. And during that 911 call, Balmer said that the governor needs to know that he will, quote, not take part in his plans for what he wants to do to the Palestinian people. The governor gave remarks in Hershey, Pennsylvania on Wednesday. Here's part of what he had to say.
I know that there are people out there who want to ascribe their own viewpoints as to what happened here and why. I choose not to participate in that.
The governor has publicly emphasized that prosecutors will determine whether that attack was motivated by his faith, he is Jewish, or his political stance. But he has repeatedly said that this type of violence is unacceptable.
And to add further confusion here, the Associated Press talked extensively with Cody Balmer's brother, and the brother said that this man, Cody Balmer, had recently become somewhat infatuated with Donald Trump and was urging the family to vote for him in the 2024 election, even though the family disagreed with him. Very hard to square that with what he said on that 911 call. So, one thing that it made me think a little bit about the assassination attempt in Butler. And at the time thinking, well, soon we'll know at least what the motivation was. And in truth, in time, we never knew really what the motivation was. And sometimes you never know. So we have some glimmers here and things that have broken through and things in search warrants and things in interviews. Sometimes they don't all line up, and there is the possibility that they never will. But of course, we'll stay tuned and see if we do learn more.
Yeah, and I want to point out one more thing. Governor Shapiro has said that it is important that the governor's mansion be reopened, that it be fixed and opened up to the people, and that he be able to be in there. So that is definitely a priority for him because he doesn't want this act of violence to shut down the people's house.
Moving now to Delaware. Delaware only has one commercial airline that flies in and out of Wilmington Airport. They've been trying to expand the airport, but right now just one airline. It's called Avelo Airlines. And this airline has made a deal with U.S. Customs and Immigration, ICE, to fly chartered deportation flights. And that has drawn the ire of many people in Delaware. There are two protests planned in and around the Wilmington Airport against this airline, Avelo Airlines. The founder and CEO of the airline has put it pretty bluntly in a statement. They say they made this particular deal with the government, quote, because this stability will continue to allow us to expand our core scheduled passenger service and keep our more than 1,100 crew members employed for years to come. That sounds to me like he's saying, basically, the money will help us grow and sustain the company, the money that they get through this deal with ICE. Of course, we'll see if that creates a backlash that indeed hurts their bottom line. But that is the latest. We expect 2 protest actions at the Wilmington airport because of this airline's deal with ICE on charter deportation flights.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting to me because, this raises a lot of questions about how companies should deal with controversial government policies. But one thing that did stand out to me in this Delaware Online article was that a spokesperson for Avelo had said that they also did these types of flights for the Biden administration. So they had a contract in the past, at least, doing this. And we talked about the Wilmington airport recently because they had just expanded.
Yes.
And to accommodate this airline. So
Correct.
It's just interesting because it adds this wrinkle now that this administration is being more aggressive and people are feeling it closer to home.
For sure. And the fact that this is more in the news, which is something we're going to talk about in our later segment today. The fact that this is more in the news has put renewed attention on these charter deportation flights. But it's an important note that indeed they had already been engaged in this in the past. So we'll see if this type of boycott and protest movement works. It's very hard to break through these days with so much happening in the news cycle. But at the very least, it's gotten people's attention enough that there are organized petitions and protests. So that's always step 1 in a boycott. Step 2 can be a bit tougher.
Yeah. From immigration action to action figures.
Yeah.
I tried.
You tried. I'll give you an A for effort. Execution was tough. Let's just say for this one, it's a heavy time, and let's put one lighter story in the news roundup today.
It was a hard transition there. So if you're on social media, you've probably seen quite a few of them, artificial intelligence generated action figures. Yeah, they have been quite interesting. And the New York Times recently did a story about the craze. Forbes has written about it. So many news organizations. Social media users have been prompting ChatGPT to create Barbie-fied versions of themselves. They've done it for famous people. They've done it for their pets. They've done it for not so famous people. And it's basically the person that's made into a plastic doll, and then their little baubles, like a cup of coffee or their hammer or their favorite tool, right?
So it takes some aspects of your personality.
Yeah.
Creates a doll that looks like you, and then some things that you like and puts them in the quote-unquote set that you would buy with your sort of theoretical AI-generated action doll.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it looks
I could see why this would catch on, by the way. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, people love it. And a local radio station, Q102, they posted their version of an action figure that represents some of the Philly neighborhoods. They had a guy from South Philly, for example, who had on an Eagles sweatshirt, hoodie. He has a yell face. He had a cheesesteak. A cheesesteak is one of his tools.
The doll is permanently yelling.
It's permanently with a fist balled up.
With the fist balled
and,
up.
He had a scepter card and a folding chair representing South Philly. If you know, you know.
I like it, but we're not all that angry. Just want to put that out.
Put it out there. And then there was a South Jersey action figure. Was a woman. She had an Easy Pass, a Cherry Hill Mall tote bag, and a fuchsia jacket with some cheetah print pants
and
on.
A shirt that says "From the Philly area." I like that.
Love it.
That's
so
really good.
it got us to thinking, right?
Sure,
what
it
would
did.
our action figures look like?
I don't know if I'm ready for this.
Producer Paige put it together.
Okay, let's take a look at. I think the first one we have up is yours, right? Cherry's action figure.
Okay.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
First of all, do you think it looks like you?
Not really, but it's not bad. I mean, it's wearing all black. I have like 5 black turtlenecks, so I'm not mad at that. And it has high boots. I have a lot of high boots.
So you're wearing all black, high boots.
There's some hoop earrings.
There's a microphone in the set, which makes sense.
Yes.
There's a judge's gavel, which I think is an allusion to your lawyer past.
Yes.
What does that say?
Sparkling water. I drink a lot of. I have cases of sparkling water at home.
So a can of something that says sparkling water.
And some seeds.
And then seeds.
Sunflower seeds.
Because you have a garden?
Because I have a garden and I love sunflowers.
Because you
suppose.
talk about it a
But
lot.
let's look at Avi's, because Avi's.
Oh, God.
First of all, Avi has on. First of all, Avi is known for his T-shirts. Okay,
Yes.
You can't see him on the radio, but those of you on YouTube, you know this.
Uh-huh.
And this shirt has Philadelphia across the front and a car on it. It's white.
One out of
Avi's
two.
smiling.
1 out of 2. 1 out of 2. Let me comment on that.
Yes.
Okay. The fact that it says Philadelphia across the front is devastatingly accurate. The car is not. I'm not a car guy.
It would have been a bike.
A train, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, so then there's the microphone.
And popcorn.
I do love popcorn.
Avi and I are cube mates, and Avi eats a bag of popcorn like every afternoon.
Yeah. And then what's the last thing there?
A history book. And of course, a microphone because of headlines of yore.
I can't tell if the guy is better looking than me or worse looking than me. That's
had a
the
nice
thing.
smile.
He
He
did
was
have a nice
smiling.
smile.
Yeah.
So stick with us on Studio 2. Coming up, we're going to talk about immigration enforcement across the Delaware Valley, and we're going to try to get to the truth of what's happening.
Yes.
Stay tuned. You're listening to Studio 2 on 90.9. And welcome back, everybody, to Studio 2. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. Recently, we've seen reports of increased immigration policy enforcement in the Delaware Valley. Publicized ICE raids at Philly businesses and revoked student visas at Temple, Penn, and other universities have created widespread uncertainty for the immigrant community.
Given the sporadic nature of this reporting, it can be tricky to string together exactly what is happening here. How are new policies rolling out, and what is the long-term impact?
So today we're joined by the folks involved in cases of detention and deportation. They're the ones who give resources to migrants and local organizations. They can explain sanctuary status and the changing immigration policies in our region.
Let me introduce Jennifer Lee with us in studio. She is a professor at Temple University Beasley School of Law and director of the Social Justice Lawyering Clinic at the Scheller Center for Social Justice. Jen, welcome to Studio 2.
Thanks so much for having me.
We also have Christian Rollo here. He's an attorney at Joseph M. Rollo and Associates, an immigration and nationality law firm. Christian, thanks for being on Studio 2.
Thank you for having me.
And before we get to our question of the day, a really important note for our listeners. We reached out to several offices under the U.S. Departments of State and Homeland Security. We received no response from most of them, and Jason Kuntz, the public affairs officer for the ICE Philadelphia field office, declined our invitation to join this show.
For the rest of the hour, we invite you at home to join the conversation. What do you want to know about immigration enforcement in our region? Have you or someone you know been impacted by these new policies? The number to call is 888-477-9499. You can email studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to leave your question or comment in the chat.
And let me start with a comment on YouTube from Micah, who says, "My friends and coworkers who are second-generation immigrants express feelings of discomfort and uncertainty every day." Jen, I want to start by asking you to give us a broad picture here. Over the last few months, what do you think has changed about immigration enforcement in our region, if anything?
Right. So I'd say there's a bunch of stuff that's changed and there's a bunch of stuff that looks kind of the same.
Okay.
And so the things that have changed is there's a randomness to who is being targeted for arrests. And that's largely because the previous administration had certain priorities in terms of who they targeted for arrests. They also had, for example, a memo on sensitive locations where they said we're not going to do arrests in locations like places of religious worship, hospitals, schools. They also had something called prosecutorial discretion, which provided the government with the ability to not pursue certain charges against people if they felt that there were equities in the case. So if someone, for example, had U.S. citizen children, had been a longtime resident, they might not pursue the case. All of those policies have been revoked. So at this point, the target for arrest is anyone, anywhere. And so that randomness is something that's changed.
Is that randomness playing out, or is it sort of a threat that is implicit in the policy change? Do you understand the question? Like it could be that they're saying we'll do this, but in actuality, they're carrying out their enforcement much in the way they had in the past.
So I think that it is actually, it's both, right?
Okay.
So I think it's both. The concept is instilling fear in communities in thinking that this is possibly going to be random targeting. But then I think we actually are seeing that people who are targeted are not the same kinds of people who were being targeted previously.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted you to finish your thought there. I apologize.
No, I was going to just talk about one other change, which is the thing that we've been seeing in the headlines, which is about the use of law in certain ways to categorize people that we had not been seeing previously, who are being targeted for deportation, and that's people who have been classified as national security threats for protesting or for engaging in First Amendment activities. And then we're also seeing people being labeled as alien enemies, right? And that, as folks well know from the news, is the case of the Venezuelans who've been deported to El Salvador. And those are really cases where we're seeing the administration circumvent longstanding constitutional principles about due process.
Real quick, you said some things haven't changed. So before I get to you, Christian, in your estimation, Jen, what has not changed?
So I think one thing that's still important to remember is that even under the Biden administration and under the Obama administration, there were deportation of immigrants. And while it wasn't random necessarily, or as random as we're seeing, and it wasn't as lawless as we're seeing, there still were people who were being deported and being separated from their families or being sent back to their home countries where they might fear persecution.
Yeah, I want to talk about who is being targeted. And I want to ask you this, Christian, and Jen, please feel free to jump in. We saw the layout of what is really different, but who are you seeing targeted now that weren't targeted previously?
So before, what was happening is like Jen said, they had priorities. So they had to focus their enforcement. There were directives that were given by the prior administration that to avoid certain areas and to focus their enforcement on individuals that have prior criminal convictions and all these types of things. Now that discretion has been taken away. Essentially, it's kind of a catch-all now. So if you're in the country illegally, you're on the table pretty much for them. So what's been happening is, say someone has a prior criminal conviction and they're targeted for arrest. So if person A is, let's say, with person B, C, D, or E, who is also without status or with no documentation, before they would just be the individual that had the conviction, the record, and who had the warrant for their arrest would be taken in. Now, if he's with someone, person B, C, D, or E, who happens to be without status, and a lot of times this is what happens at work sites and these types of places, they also are targeted. So this is kind of more we've seen collateral arrests, I would say.
Yeah. And my follow-up to that is, because in addition to these collateral arrests, we've heard of refugees, people who've had green cards. We've heard of people who've had legal status, like work visas, student visas. How does this weigh in? And I know you, Jen, you said that was a major difference, but have we seen that type of target, those types of people being targeted by any administration?
Well, in terms of the asylees, people that have status here in the United States, I do know USCIS has just issued a policy under the new Trump administration. They are actually pausing their process for the green card, which after you achieve asylum status, you're able to file to adjust your status to get your green card after 1 year. Now that is on pause. They are re-reviewing all these cases. So that is a seismic shift from the prior administration. Also, like she mentioned, individuals who have visas on college campuses, depending if the administration sees their views as contrary to the U.S. national security interests, they've been going there and revoking them.
Yeah.
So it's definitely in those instances, these are definitely different policies. They're definitely different in terms of that. And moving forward, it's going to be interesting to see how far it is taken.
So what we haven't actually addressed here is whether there is more enforcement. So different people targeted, a randomness to who's being targeted. But Jen, can you tell, best you could tell, is there more enforcement? Are there more people being detained or deported?
So I think I looked at numbers recently, and the numbers actually don't look any bigger so far. And some of this has to do with the numbers at the border versus numbers in the interior. But I think that, maybe what you're alluding to is, statements that have been made by the administration about, we're going to be engaging in mass deportations nationwide. And I think it's really important to understand that the federal government doesn't have the infrastructure in place to actually accomplish that, right? And that's because they don't have the people, the manpower to do it. They don't have the detention facilities to do it. And so I think that's just a really important point to make, because while we are seeing this kind of random and lawless enforcement happening nationwide, it just doesn't, the idea that it's going to be massive and enormous and that we're going to see everybody here who's unlawfully be deported from the United States, that's just not a reality given the current infrastructure.
Yeah, I want to read this from Matt from Norristown, who says, I know someone who is here with a green card, married to an American, but who is nonetheless fearful. They are very careful what they put on Facebook, and they are avoiding protests because, God forbid, the First Amendment apply to everyone, whether citizens or not, as the Constitution actually states. I want to talk about this, this randomness and what the change in target actually does psychologically to the community in mass. What are you seeing? What are you hearing from people, who are giving you calls? I don't know if you've seen, Christian, a spike in calls or whatever, but what are you seeing and what are you hearing from folks as they hear these stories sort of bubble up to the surface?
Well, it's definitely, there's been a chilling effect on the immigrant community. People are fearful to even leave their homes. I've seen people who would, very vibrant members of the community before, if they're without status, they're no longer doing the things that they were doing before.
That means it's not going to work?
They, for the most part, they'll go to work and then they'll just come home. They won't engage in anything social. They won't go to church. They won't do anything.
Because they're worried about this proximity effect.
Exactly. Yeah. They're worried about these types of things. And I will say that there's been a seismic spike in the amount of calls we're getting about people being detained. So to Jen's point, the numbers may not look any different. However, the people crossing are much less, so the denominator is much less in terms of what we're seeing. So
you are getting more calls about detention.
Yes.
Can you just go into that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What's the before and after here?
So before we were getting very, very few calls about detention. I have to say, under the Biden administration, we weren't doing many detained cases at all. Now, since I would say January, we've had at least 30 to 40 calls about these types of cases where we've been retained, and I would say maybe 6 to 7 of them. They're generally cases where, for instance, there was an individual who had there was just a domestic violence charge, and ultimately the case was not prost because it was null prost as it calls, like the spouse. It was just an argument that got heated, and then he was actually detained on the courthouse steps.
So he went to court to deal with that case, and ICE was there.
Yes.
Wow.
So
on the way out. Yeah.
You're saying before, I'm trying to understand this. So obviously people were being deported under the Biden administration, many millions of people, in fact. But it was not. But you were not getting calls for detention cases back then. So why wouldn't you have been getting those calls?
Because under Biden, it was reduced to individuals that likely had orders of final removal. So they are not in. So those individuals are immediately removable in some cases. I mean, you could file emergency petitions for stay and those types of things. But these cases, in terms of detention that we're seeing now, are individuals who are either in the process now or have never had any contact with the immigration system.
Got it.
Wow.
And as soon as, so for instance, if someone enters the country illegally, is not, they have no contact with immigration, they're here for 15 or 20 years, and they're then detained, constitutional rights do attach, and they're able to fight a case, albeit, in detention. And we're, depending on the equities that they do have, we're able to fight for a bond motion, perhaps.
So different people being targeted means more people being detained because of the stage of the process they're in.
Correct.
In removal. Got it.
It depends, yeah.
And I'm thinking about the process, Jen, because, lawyers typically you have a process, you get to fight it in court, right? Has the process changed at all in the past couple of months? Have you seen people, and due process has been a big thing we've heard on some of the more high profile cases. There have not been these hearings that folks used to have. What's happening locally? Are you seeing that happen here?
Yeah, so so as we know from the high profile cases, right, or the Venezuelans who were deported, right, I mean, that's a pretty good indication of not due process not attaching the way Christian has talked about, right?
Sure.
So under most categories, there's some exceptions. You have the right to see an immigration judge, and you have a right to defend your case, and you have the right to apply for affirmative immigration relief. And clearly that's been kind of thrown out the window with the Venezuelans. I think the other thing we're seeing where due process has really kind of been thrown out the window is with some of these visa terminations that are happening with students. And people are probably familiar. There are a number of lawsuits filed. The student visa stuff is kind of a mess, to just be really frank.
Yes.
And it's hard to understand because it's happening in two different ways. They're both revocation of student visas by the Department of State and they're terminations of student status by the Department of Homeland Security. And what's happening is universities are often being notified about these terminations, and it's creating this whole confusing mess. And then what happens is students in those situations are sometimes deciding to leave the country on their own without self-deport. Exactly.
On the topic of self-deportation, because look, and this is where I'm going to reiterate, we reached out to the government. We would love to hear their rationale, their logic, and their side of what they believe is happening on the ground. They didn't respond. So we have to fill in some gaps here. On the topic of self-deportation, I'm imagining if the government is looking at this situation and saying, our goal is to remove a lot of people very quickly. We realize we do not have the infrastructure to do it. Therefore, what we're going to try to do is get people to leave on their own volition using strategy X, Y, and Z. Do you think, Jen, that is what's happening? And if so, what are the strategies they are doing to achieve that?
Right. So I think it's different in different circumstances, right? So I think in the student example, it might make sense to, and again, this is up to an individual, right, and their circumstances, but you can imagine a scenario where you come from a foreign country, you're here temporarily, and you think this isn't worth it. Like, I don't want to deal with hiring a lawyer and fighting.
I don't have a family here.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so it might make sense in those scenarios to say, look, I just don't want to deal with this. I'm going back to my home country. But I think it's a really different scenario, and I think Christian can probably speak to this too. When we're talking about people who've been here for a long time, who have been integrated into their communities, exactly like you said, they have families, they have U.S. citizen children, they have a U.S. citizen spouse, right? And those people I think are going to be a lot less likely
to self-deport.
And
we've been hearing also, I'm curious if your clients, Christian, have received any of these notifications, these strange mass emails saying, you know, your probation or whatever, your parole has been revoked. And sometimes immigration attorneys themselves are getting these emails. It seems tied to this idea that perhaps you can convince people to just leave. First of all, have you seen any of those tactics play out? But secondly, what are your clients saying about their emotional, psychological response to those things?
Well, yeah, we've gotten some that have gotten the letter. Individuals who are currently in the process and have a right to fight their case here in the United States. That does not change. So a parole status is for what at the border, depending on what the circumstances were, they were given perhaps 1 year to just they were paroled into the United States legally.
Yeah.
So then that is the status that's been revoked. But that does not mean that these individuals do not have the right to, fight their case, whether that be asylum or if they married a U.S. citizen. So there's kind of, that's a distinction to be made there. And we are seeing that in that context. Additionally, we're seeing a lot of folks who are calling about, they're worried about mom and dad, like you said, because there are so many mixed status families. Like you have mom and dad may not have a status, but they have 3 to 4 children who in fact have lived their entire lives here in the United States. And they're here and they're worried because the mom and dad, they may be in whether if there is a prior order of removal that exists, or if they're currently in the process, maybe pending an asylum case.
Yeah.
It's just
but real quick, when people receive those emails or just read headlines, Jen was saying, like, they've got a lot at stake here, so it's going to take a lot to get that person to self-deport.
Absolutely.
But are people telling you, I'm thinking about it, or are they basically saying, no, I got to fight this because I have no choice, I have to fight it?
Mainly, most of my clients are ones that have been here for a significant period. We do have some that entered, within the last few years or so, but they have not. They wouldn't be subject to that. But the ones that are receiving this are, generally ones that have had a significant bit here. So it's, most of my clients want to fight.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add, Jen?
Yeah, on the self-deportation issue, this is actually something Christian mentioned to me earlier when we were talking, but detention is a really good device to use for people to self-deport because you hold people in detention. We call it detention. It's really jail, right?
It's a very scary prospect.
Right, and Moshannon Valley, which is the detention center here in Center County, Pennsylvania, is the largest immigration detention facility in the Northeast. It opened 2 years ago, and it used to be a federal prison, right? And so just to give you an idea, so if people are held in detention for months and months, a lot of times, and I'm sure Christian can confirm this, people decide they don't want to fight their case anymore because they're basically in jail. And so that's another tactic that the administration can use to get some people to self-deport.
Also, the conditions in which they are in, that they're oftentimes with hardened criminals. Like their crime is, entering the country legally. Yes, it is a crime. It is a crime, but it's not, it does not rise to the level to be with murderers and all these types of, so that sometimes is an aggravating factor as well. Also, when they're detained for so long, it really inhibits our access to them. So it's hard to, I've been telling people prospectively, like if they're concerned to prepare preemptive packages almost of taxes and birth certificates of children and any equities that they may have, so that I can then quickly and swiftly, if appropriate, try to file a bond motion or whatever the case may be. So trying to do basically anything that I can to preempt some of the issues that occur when someone is detained for a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, I've heard that people have been putting childcare, contingency plans in place because you don't know when or if it could happen. And if you have American-born children, they don't know. You have to be prepared. I want to ask you, Jen, about sanctuary status, because Philadelphia has declared itself a sanctuary city. It has not been revoked under the Parker administration. What exactly does that mean? And does that provide any additional covering for people who may not be documented or have questionable status
Yeah, so sanctuary is kind of, in some ways, it's a complicated topic, but just to boil down the essence of when people use that word, what they're usually referring to are policies where a locality has decided to de-link its own resources with federal immigration enforcement. So just to give an example, they will say things like, we're not going to let our police conduct immigration enforcement. We're not going to lend resources towards federal immigration enforcement. And that's entirely allowable under the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, because localities do not have to do the federal government's job. And so here in Philadelphia, we have a number of policies that are doing that delinking. But the thing that's important to understand about that is that it's really important, but it doesn't actually protect individuals from ICE enforcement. So just because Philadelphia, for example, has a number of sanctuary policies, it doesn't stop ICE from entering our jurisdiction and making arrests of people for deportation.
Yeah, and I wanted to, by the way, I want to give out our phone number again, 888-477-9499. You can email studio2@whyy.org. And our question of the day is, what are your questions about immigration enforcement in our region? And if you or someone you know has been impacted by these new policies, please call us again, 888-477-9499. And I wanted to, is there any difference between what's happening in Philadelphia and what's happening in the collar counties or in other counties in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so that's what, we'd spoken about that a bit. Given that Philadelphia does have that sanctuary city status, they are not required to. So if someone commits a crime and goes through a process here in the Philadelphia County, they're not required. Local officials are not required to cooperate with ICE and facilitate the arrest of the individual upon completion of the case. Whereas in the counties, we are seeing, and this was always the case, but obviously it's ramped up now. Delaware County, Monco, Bucks, there is a more of a willingness, given that they don't have the status. There is more of that data sharing happening. That is,
and that's having an impact on the ground.
Absolutely, yeah, it's having a lot of the people being detained are in fact living in these counties. Upper Darby being one of them. That's where we've seen a significant amount of immigration enforcement being done.
And I want to slow that down for a second, because it basically means if you get stopped, for example, in a county, they would detain you and they realize that your status is questionable. You could be detained for ICE to come pick you up.
Well, yeah, assume they would. Yeah, that is possible. Like, say if they committed a traffic violation and then an officer questioned them about their status and they couldn't produce identification, that could absolutely happen. Okay. And obviously, there's, they don't tell us specifically like how, but it is possible.
Yeah. Just before we go to break, I want to make sure we get in this question from many of our listeners. We're basically getting the same question from people over and over again. And I'll read this email from Richie. What can the most privileged, safest, generationally established citizens do to help folks with risky status? I don't know much about this stuff. How can the populace actually help? What is your advice, Jen, to people who are listening and feel that they want to help people who may find themselves in the situations we've been describing?
So one easy thing, or maybe it's not easy, actually, I take back the easy, but one thing that I think people who have status who work at a workplace where they work alongside people without status can do is talk to their employers about getting protective policies for their immigrant workers in case ICE comes to the workplace. And that's something you can do as an organizing thing that would be protected under the National Labor Relations Act. But at the same time, you're kind of using your privilege as a U.S. citizen to get your employer to enact some protocols and policies to deal with ICE coming to the workplace.
And there's a lot of rules around what you can and can't do, and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll give more advice on the other side of this break, because we have one coming up right now. By the way, we want you to participate in this conversation. What do you want to know about immigration enforcement in our region? Have you or someone you know been impacted by these policies? The number to call is 888-477-9499. You can email studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave your question, comment in the chat. Also share this with a friend.
And welcome back, everybody, to Studio 2 on WHYY. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. We are continuing our conversation about how changes to immigration policies are impacting our region. What do you want to know about immigration enforcement in our region? Have you or someone you know been impacted by the new policies? The number is 888-477-9499. You can also email studio2@whyy.org.
Let me reintroduce our guests. With us is Temple University law professor Jen Lee, who directs the Social Justice Lawyering Clinic at Temple University, and Christian Rollo, who is an attorney at Joseph M. Rollo and Associates.
Yes, and joining us now is Charlene Maddox Chimilio. She is the wife of Jesreel Chimilio, who was detained in February and is currently in ICE custody. Charlene, welcome to Studio 2, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to just start by you taking us back to, first of all, how are you?
As well as I can be, Lord, in Jesus' name, as well as I can be.
Yeah.
As well as I can be, because of the situation.
Yeah, and I want you to tell us a little bit about the situation. Take us back to February. How did you find out that your husband was detained by ICE?
My. So he was on his way to work, and my neighbor called me and told me that my husband was yelling for my name. And all I can do is run outside. I had my 9-month-old and just run outside. In the first car I seen, I just stopped in front of the car, but it wasn't the car that had him. They'd already left already. Thank God, because I'm a visual person, so I probably wouldn't want to see that. Yeah, not at all. But and then the rest is history. I haven't seen him since, unfortunately.
Have you heard from him at all?
Yeah, we talk on the phone, but yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Do you know where he's being detained?
Right now, he's currently in Moshannon Valley. He was in Pike County. They tried to put him on a plane. He refused to get on the plane, so they put him in Moshannon Valley.
And what is the status of the case right now?
They're trying to deport him. They gave him 10 days for his lawyer to find a way to reopen his case.
Wow. So I know people don't, we were meeting you today, Charlene.
Yes.
Tell us about your husband. What kind of man is he? I know you have children together. Tell us about your relationship. We want to know who he is.
He's a kind guy. He is there for the community. I am a Christian, so when I think back on why do, I guess people say bad things happen to good people. So, my favorite thing I tell him is that the Lord has our attention now. If he wanted our attention, he has our attention now. But, I fell in love with him because he knows the Bible. He's a kind man. I told him he's the best I had because he loves me for me. And, unfortunately, we're in this situation for something that he did 14 years ago.
Yeah.
So that something 14 years ago, he was arrested. He served some time in prison. It was a DUI and a drug charge. Is that correct?
He didn't serve time in prison. I had to clear that up.
Okay. So that was in the original reporting, but that's not
Yeah,
the
that
case.
was something that I even said myself that I cleared up with him last night. So
this was before you knew him, by the way, which is why there's some confusion.
Yeah. It was before I knew him. So he got pulled over for a DUI. He also told me last night that the marijuana that he had, that the police officers upped the charge, yeah. So the plea deal that he took, he was saying that he didn't understand. I guess the public defender and the immigration lawyer that he was working with, they didn't fully explain to him that him taking the plea deal was going to affect his status. Yeah. Unfortunately.
And your husband is from Belize.
Yes, he's from Belize.
And I have to ask you this question. I know, you said the status. He's currently detained. Have you thought about what you all would do if he is actually deported back to Belize?
I always tell him that, I love him so much. We can live in a box together. So, if for some reason the Lord, if this is his will in Jesus' name, then I'll prayerfully that I'll be able to go over there. We're trying to my 3-year-old has a passport. I have a passport, but we're trying to get the 9-month-old passport, but it's been like a hassle getting mailed to him for some reason.
Yeah.
He said he has no access to the law library. So it's unfortunate that he's trying to notarize a letter because both parents have to be present for the passport.
For the passport, yep.
Wow.
And it's been like a super huge problem. Like I spent like $31 for him to get mail that he hasn't received like 2 months ago. I had someone, it just says that the receipt just says that someone signed for it. He never received it. That's when he was in Pike County, but now he's not in Pike County. He's in Moshannon Valley. So we're trying to do it all over again. Try to figure something out.
So your husband moved here at age 17, right? In 2002.
Yeah.
He's lived in this country for a very long time.
Yeah.
So did you think, because of the way we were talking about this through the hour, the way that these enforcements have happened in the past, people like your husband simply have not been targets. Did you think that his longtime status as a worker in this country, as a community member in this country, the fact that he's married to a U.S. citizen, did you think that would protect him?
I did think that it would protect him. Unfortunately, what really put him under the radar, he was going to a job in Huntington Valley where he got pulled over for a heavy cab, and the rest is history. Yeah, they came
because
to
of
the
that,
house.
because of that single traffic stop.
Yeah,
that triggered all of this.
All of it.
Unbelievable.
Wow. And Jennifer, when you hear this, I mean, is this typical of some of the stories that you've been hearing, Jen and Christian? I mean, this story of a family person, been here 20 plus years, and now it's being detained and targeted by ICE and does not know what the future holds.
I mean, yeah, there are a significant amount of people that this is happening to, and in all varying stages. It's one of those things that obviously it's a case-by-case basis, but we are seeing longtime people here that have significant ties that maybe made a mistake many years ago, and are now being targeted for that in deportation proceedings or whatever the case may be. If there's a prior order of removal that is now being acted upon and effectuated, they're taking steps to do that, to effectuate the removal.
Charlene, I wanted to ask you, when this happened, you faced a choice, which is I could try to deal with this with an attorney privately, or I can go public so people know about what's happening to my family. Why did you make the decision to talk about this openly, and has that been difficult?
It has been difficult because you do have to relive some moments. I chose to talk about it because my husband, I want to do what he wants me to do, to fight for him in any way that I can, turn over any rock that I can. And at first we was hesitant about it, but he said, go ahead and tell them, because he said it's just some things that are just not being, just like him not having access to the law library. I have a senator that wanted to help with just like a congressional inquiry to like see what is going on, but we can't even get papers to him to sign electronically. We can't mail it to him. It's like, it's so some things I feel as though, like when he told me that he don't have access to the law library, I never been in jail before, but he was making it seem like he should have access. He was saying he doesn't, they don't hear the news or nothing like that. So he calls it double jeopardy because he wasn't in jail, but he had to have an inklet, 14 years ago. He was just saying like, I did the time, or I served whatever I needed to do, and now
I'm being repunished for that is his feeling.
Double jeopardy. And you are an American citizen, just to be clear. And so do you feel like because you are an American citizen that you are able to fight and maybe even speak up for some families who cannot speak up?
And hopefully that is the case, and that's why I'm here to speak up for people who may have be scared or hesitant. Like I said, I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. So it's past what we're going through. Right now, all I have to do is pray and just have faith that he'll work it out in our favor. Yeah.
Presumably, there are many, many people listening right now who just want to know what they can do, whether it's for you or for people in a similar situation. What is your message for those people listening?
The message that I would give for the people who are listening is, like I said before, from my Christian background, to pray and have faith and do whatever you can do. Talk to whoever you can talk to. Don't stop fighting. Don't be scared, because that's what they want you to do. They want you to be scared. Come out here and tell the truth. Tell what's really going on.
That is Charlene Maddox Chimilio, the wife of Jesreel Chimilio, who is in custody right now and faces perhaps imminent deportation to Belize. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And I also want to thank our other two guests this hour. We have, of course, Christian Rollo, who is the attorney at Joseph M. Rollo and Associates, an immigration and nationality law firm. Christian, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
And Jennifer Lee, who is a professor at Temple University Beasley School of Law and director of the Social Justice Lawyers Law Clinic at the Scheller Justice Center for Social Justice. I'm sorry, Jen. Thank you so much for your time today on Studio 2.
Yes, thanks so much.
And thank you to the many folks who emailed in.
There was a lot of emails.
Such great questions.
We couldn't get to today, and of course we can always revisit this topic, but we wanted to give folks a chance to tell their stories and to get our experts' take on exactly what's happening. So as we end the program today, we wanted to take a moment to note the passing of Francis Davis. Davis was among the nation's premier cultural critics, known best for his writing on jazz. Over a long and distinguished career, he worked for The Village Voice, The Inquirer, and The Atlantic, among others.
He was also a Philadelphian, raised in Southwest Philly, educated at Bartram High School and Temple University. And while at Temple in 1966, David attended a concert by another Philadelphian, John Coltrane. He later said it was the concert that inspired him to become a music critic. About a decade later, Davis was working at a record store on Penn's campus when he met his future wife, our colleague, Terry Gross.
If you want to read more about Francis Davis, his life, his work, we recommend an obituary posted at npr.org/music.
And we here at Studio 2 want to send out our deepest condolences to Terry and the entire Fresh Air family during this extremely difficult time.
As we go out, we are listening to the song Naima from the aforementioned John Coltrane. Studio 2 is produced by Debbie Builder, Paige Murray Bessler, and Andreas Copes. Mike Schiffler is our visual producer. Al Banks and Tina Caliquet engineered today's show. Our executive producer is Kevin McCory. Joan Isabella is our audio general manager.
From Studio 2 here at WHYY in Philadelphia, I'm Cherry Gregg.
I'm Avi Wolfman-Arendt, and we will talk to you tomorrow. And a reminder that the next Studio 2 on the road is coming up next week. We'll be in Delaware County at the Middletown Free Library for a panel that we are calling Developing the Philly Suburbs, NIMBYs, YIMBYs, and You.
The event is next Thursday, April 24th at 6 p.m. We'll be talking about how the need for more housing often meets resistance because of a desire for open space, skepticism of developers, and backlash against sprawl. And if you want to be there next week, register at whyy.org/events. Coming up next on WHYY.